with a loose screw, 150, maybe 170 miles an hour, down the turnpike without a helmet, then get on a roller coaster.
Vin Diesel is one of the toughest men in Hollywood. He plays invincible characters, drives through explosions, and never flinches. But standing on the stage at the 2026 Cannes Film Festival in front of the entire world, this man completely broke down. Tears streaming down his face, voice cracking, he revealed a promise he made to his best friend, a promise he has been quietly keeping for over a decade. And what he said left everyone in that room speechless. The night everything stopped at Cannes. It was supposed to be a celebration. The Fast and Furious franchise was marking its 25th anniversary, and Cannes, one of the most prestigious film festivals on the planet, had set aside a special screening to honor the series that changed action movies forever. Stars had gathered. Cameras were rolling. The energy in the room was electric, but nobody expected what happened next. When Vin Diesel stepped up to speak, something shifted. The man who has spent 25 years playing Dominic Toretto, a character defined by muscle, loyalty, and an almost supernatural refusal to show weakness, stood before that audience and simply let go. His voice, usually so deep and controlled, began to crack almost immediately. His eyes filled, and then the tears came. The audience went silent. This wasn't a prepared emotional beat or a Hollywood performance. Anyone watching could see the difference between an actor hitting a mark and a human being confronting grief that never fully heals. Vin Diesel was not performing. He was remembering. And what he remembered changed everything about how people understand this franchise. Because for 25 years, Fast and Furious has been sold to the world as a story about cars, heists, and family. But on that stage at Cannes, on May 13, 2026, Vin Diesel revealed the deeper truth, that underneath all of it, this entire franchise has been one man's way of keeping a promise to the brother he lost. But to understand why this moment hits so differently from anything Vin Diesel has ever said publicly, you have to go back to where it all started, and the quiet conversation between two men that nobody knew about until now. The promise that started it all. To understand why Vin Diesel broke down that night, you have to go back to the beginning. When the first Fast and Furious film came out in 2001, nobody knew what it would become. It was a modest street racing movie with a relatively unknown cast. Vin Diesel was not yet a global superstar. Paul Walker was a good-looking kid from California who had done some decent films but hadn't broken through in any major way. Neither of them had any reason to believe they were standing at the start of something that would last a quarter of a century. But somewhere along the way, as they spent time together on set, something happened that nobody scripted. Vin Diesel described it himself at Cannes, voice trembling. Initially, it wasn't scripted that this blue-eyed, blonde-haired guy would become my brother. That was the truth of it. Their bond wasn't manufactured by a studio. It wasn't a PR strategy. It grew organically, in the way that real friendships do, through shared time, shared work, shared laughter, and shared belief in something bigger than themselves. And as the franchise grew, as the sequels came and the audience expanded and the budgets climbed, the two of them started talking about the future. Not just the next film, the long game. They made a promise to each other that they would take this thing all the way. Fast 10 and beyond. That was the target. That was what they said they would do together. Think about what that means for a moment. Two men, in the middle of building something remarkable, look at each other and agree, we're not stopping. We're going to see this all the way through. It wasn't a contract. It wasn't something a lawyer wrote up. It was the kind of promise that only matters between people who genuinely trust each other. And then, without any warning, half of that promise was left standing alone. But what happens to a promise when the person you made it to is suddenly, violently, and permanently gone? November 20, 2013, the day the promise became a burden. Paul Walker died on November 30, 2013. He was 40 years old and was in the middle of filming Furious 7. He got into a Porsche Carrera GT with a friend in Valencia, California, and neither of them came home. The world was shocked. Fans who had grown up with the franchise felt it like a personal loss. Social media filled with tributes. Theaters screened the films in his honor. The industry paused. But none of that shock, none of that public grief came close to what Vin Diesel experienced privately. He had lost his brother, not just a co-worker or a mere colleague. This was his brother, the man who had become family not by blood but by choice, which, if you know anything about the core theme of Fast and Furious, is the only kind of family that really counts. And now Vin Diesel was left with a franchise half-built, a promise unfulfilled, and a grief that had no clean ending. What do you do when you made a promise to someone who is no longer there to hold you to it? Some people would have walked away. Nobody would have blamed him. The studio could have ended the series, or rebooted it entirely, or handed it to someone else. There were options. There were exits. Vin Diesel didn't take any of them. Instead, he made a decision that has quietly shaped every single thing he has done with this franchise since 2013. He decided the promise still counted. He decided that Paul Walker not being alive to see it through was not a reason to stop. It was a reason to keep going, because a promise made to someone you love doesn't expire when they die. If anything, it becomes more sacred. So he kept building. He kept showing up. He kept Dominic Toretto alive. Film after film after film, carrying something invisible on his shoulders that very few people fully understood until that night at Cannes. And while the world saw a man who kept showing up for a franchise, what most people never saw was the deeply personal way Vin Diesel chose to carry Paul Walker with him. Not just in the films, but in his own home, in his own family, every single day. Meadow, Pauline, and the way Vin Diesel chose to grieve. There is something important about how Vin Diesel has handled grief that gets overlooked in most coverage of his friendship with Paul Walker. He didn't just mourn privately and then move on. He actively wove Paul Walker into the fabric of his own life in ways that were personal, deliberate, and deeply human. The most profound example is his daughter Pauline. Vin Diesel named his daughter, born in March 2015, just over a year after Paul Walker's death, Pauline. Not as a vague tribute, not as a passing gesture, as a permanent living reminder of the man he lost. He has spoken about this publicly, and his words are difficult to hear without feeling the weight of them. When you call her, I know you're near. I'm going to say that again. When you call her name, I know you're near. That is not a man who has processed his grief and filed it away. That is a man who built his grief into the architecture of his daily life, so that he never has to go a single day without his brother being present in some form. And then there is Meadow Walker. Paul Walker's daughter, now 27 years old, was just a teenager when her father died. Vin Diesel has spoken at Cannes and elsewhere about the responsibility he felt toward her after losing Paul. He said he told himself he had to be there for Meadow, and notably, he specified that this wasn't just because of a promise. He meant it personally. He meant it as family. At the 2026 Cannes screening, Meadow was there. Vin gave her a special shout-out from the stage, acknowledging her presence among the cast. The image of that moment, Paul Walker's daughter standing in the room while Paul Walker's best friend wept openly, captures something that is almost impossible to put into words. This is what real loyalty looks like. Not the Hollywood version, not the movie version, the actual human version, which is quieter, longer, and far more costly than anything that ever ends up on screen. Vin Diesel has been paying that cost for 12 years. But it wasn't just what he did in private that revealed the depth of this bond. It was the specific words he chose on that Cannes stage. and exactly why those words stopped everyone in the room cold, what he actually said, and why it hit so hard.
And it all started in my building, so there was always this kind of close association with, and for me it was free candy.
Words matter, and the specific words Vin Diesel chose at Cannes matter more than most people have taken time to examine. He said, "I hope that in your life you have a brother like Paul." That sentence is doing an enormous amount of work. He didn't say he hoped people had a friend like Paul. He didn't say a co-star, a partner, a colleague. He said a brother. And he said it while his voice was trembling, while tears were running down his face, in front of the global press at one of the world's most watched film festivals. He was not performing brotherhood, he was testifying to it. There is a particular kind of grief that only exists between men who were close in the way Vin Diesel and Paul Walker were close, where the friendship was never fully articulated while the person was alive, because that's not how those friendships work. You don't sit down and tell your brother you love him every day. You just show up. You keep the promises. You build things together. And the depth of the bond only becomes visible to the world when one of you is gone and the other one is standing on a stage at Cannes is unable to hold it together. He also said that the friendship was never scripted, that this blue-eyed, blonde-haired guy was never supposed to become his brother. That's a significant admission, because it strips away any remaining possibility that any of this was manufactured for the audience. It was real. The promise, the grief, all of it is real. And the decision to keep going, to take the franchise to Fast 10 and beyond, as he and Paul once agreed, that was real too. When Vin Diesel talks about family in these films, people sometimes roll their eyes. It has become a meme. Characters say family so often in the Fast and Furious franchise that it has become a cultural joke. But standing at Cannes, crying, unable to hold his voice steady while talking about the man he named his daughter after, there was no joke anywhere near that moment. Just the truth of what family actually costs and what it actually means to honor it. Because before Cannes could ever happen, there was one film that nearly broke Vin Diesel completely, and understanding what it cost him to finish it changes everything about how you see the 12 years that followed. The weight of finishing Furious 7, and what that film really was. Before you can fully appreciate what Cannes 2026 meant, you have to understand what completing Furious 7 required of Vin Diesel. Paul Walker died with the film unfinished. There was footage, there were scenes, there were conversations about where the story was going. And then, suddenly, the director, the studio, and everyone involved had to make decisions nobody ever wants to make. How do you complete a film when one of its two central characters is gone? The answer they found was one of the most carefully handled tributes in modern cinema history. Using previously shot footage, digital effects, and performances from Paul Walker's brothers as stand-ins, they completed the character's arc and gave Brian O'Connor a send-off that the audience deserved and Paul Walker had earned. The final scene of Furious 7, where Dom and Brian drive side by side before going their separate ways, and the film fades to white as the words "for Paul" appear on screen, did not just move audiences, it broke them. Cinemas around the world reported people sitting in their seats long after the credits finished, unable to leave. That scene did not feel like a film ending. It felt like a goodbye that the whole world was allowed to witness together. Grown men wept openly. The scene has been watched hundreds of millions of times online in the years since. But think about what it took to create that scene. Vin Diesel had to sit in editing rooms and watch footage of his dead friend. He had to make creative decisions about how Paul Walker's face and voice and presence would appear on screen one final time. He had to sign off on something that was simultaneously a film ending and a funeral. He did all of that while the promise was still technically unfinished. Furious 7 was not Fast 10. there were still films to make. There was still more road ahead. So he finished the tribute, he delivered it to the world, and then he turned around and kept going. That is what Cannes 2026 was building toward. Every film after Furious 7 was made in the shadow of that scene, in the shadow of that promise, in the shadow of a friendship that the entire world had now witnessed the depth of. When Vin Diesel stood on that stage and wept, he wasn't crying about one moment. He was crying about all of it. The 12 years of showing up, the films he made while grieving, the daughter he named Pauline, the promise that never had an expiration date. Cannes was simply the moment when he finally let himself feel the full sum of everything he had been carrying since November 30 and 2013. So after everything, the grief, the films, the promises, the years, what does it actually mean that he made it here? And what happens now? The promise kept, and what comes next?
Because I was itching, so I looked like I had patches, so I looked like the Wolfman with rabies.
Vin Diesel made a promise to take Fast and Furious to Fast 10 and beyond. He kept it. Fast 10 was released. The franchise crossed a quarter century. And now at Cannes 2026, with 25 years of films behind him, he stood on that stage and let the world see the full weight of what keeping that promise actually required. It required finishing films while grieving. It required sitting in the editing room for Furious 7, watching footage of Paul Walker, and making decisions about how to honor him rather than erase him. It required raising a daughter named Pauline and watching Paul's daughter Meadow grow up and being the person who shows up for her because Paul no longer can. It required, for 25 years, never letting the franchise collapse under the weight of its own loss, never letting the grief win. And now, at 58 years old, with everything he promised to do largely accomplished, Vin Diesel is allowed to feel all of it. That's what Cannes 2026 looked like. That's what those tears were. They were not tears of sadness alone. They were the tears of a man who looked back at the road behind him and realized, I did it. I actually did what I said I would do. Paul, I did it. The franchise is not finished. There are more films planned, more stories to tell. Vin Diesel has said as much, but something shifted at Cannes. Something was completed, or at least acknowledged, in a way it had never been before. The promise that was made between two men on a movie set 25 years ago, quietly, without cameras, without contracts, without anyone paying much attention, has been honored. Film by film, year by year, through grief and doubt and loss, it has been honored. And the man who made that promise stood in front of the world and wept, not because he failed, but because he finally let himself feel the full truth of what it meant to succeed. Vin Diesel did not have to keep going after Paul Walker died. Nobody would have blamed him for stopping. But he didn't stop. He kept building, kept showing up, kept the promise alive long after the person he made it to was gone. That's not a Hollywood story. By all accounts, that's a deeply human story. Some people carry grief quietly for years, not because they have no other choice, but because the love behind it is too real to put down. Vin Diesel is one of those people, and whether or not you have ever watched a single Fast and Furious film, there is something in that story that belongs to everyone who has ever lost someone and wondered whether it was worth it to keep the promises they made together. It is. It always is. If this hit you the way it hit the audience at Cannes,
And you gotta forgive Jimmy and myself. It's such a great feeling to see.
share it with someone who needs to see it. And if you want more stories like this, real ones, about loyalty, loss, and the things people carry quietly for years, subscribe, because there's so much more coming. Paul Walker may be gone, but the promise he inspired, that's still very much alive.